party and our movement needs to understands African internationalism, needs to be won to that understanding, because African internationalism informs us. It tells us what it is that we're struggling for. It's the thing that keeps us from just going hither and thither, as it was often said by somebody a long time ago. It is the thing that keeps us on course. It is part of what prevents us from just running into the swamps of opportunism, just being pulled around by events of the day. So it's really important that we deepen the ideological and political development of people who are coming into the party, many of whom are thrust into responsibilities soon upon coming into our party, in our movement, and will have to provide leadership for others, all of whom will be required to defend the theory, the politic, the program, platform, the agenda of the African People's Socialist Party. So we think that it's really necessary to do this. And this study, as I mentioned earlier, it consists of a number of pieces that appeared in the Burning Spear newspaper over something like a 9-month period. And it is a struggle to really win some kind of understanding within the African liberation movement itself of what it is that we should be fighting for. What is the struggle all about? And it challenges this assumption, false assumption that we sometimes hear, where people just assume, well, I like this group, I like that group, and just pick the one you like the best without any recognition of the significance of the philosophy, of the ideology, the program of the group that we're talking about. And so part of what characterizes our struggle here and in the world is that there is really a subjective, kind of almost personalized politic and philosophy revolving around the fact that our people have come to be known as Black people, and our oppressors have characterized themselves as white people. And the question for many is, if you're for the white people or for the Black people, without any ability to discern what that means, and if that's good enough to just be for the white people or against the white people and for the Black people. Also, I think it's important to say that this study deals with the struggles that the African People's Socialist Party initiated with other tendencies within the National Liberation Movement. I say National Liberation Movement because as most people here understand, that a movement has been distinguished by at least two tendencies, one of which assumes that the way forward, the way to become free, is to integrate with white people, integrate into the US. And another, broadly speaking, is characterized by a recognition that we have to win our freedom from the US, from white people. And this has been the broad distinction between the two. But even within these two tendencies that I've just mentioned, there are differences. And this is part of what it is that we're struggling with here when we look at this question, when we look at this study. So one tendency, one line within the broad tendency for national liberation within the United States has been one that we've characterized as New Africanism. And we'll say some more about what that is as we move forward. Of course, people have heard of Pan-Africanism, which represents another line within this broad tendency for national liberation as well. We are African internationalists, and that is the philosophy that guides everything that we do, and by which we measure the significance, the success of all of the other political lines. So we're going to start here, a chapter that begins, New African Opportunism Reveals Alliance with Colonial White Power. And this is page 29 in the book. Should you be one of the people that might have possession of the entire book. And this, as it begins, is reprinted from the June 1989 issue of the Burning Spear. In May's Burning Spear, when I wrote on this page about the lamentable state of what passes for the Black liberation movement during these serious times, I had not read the spring 1989 issue of the New Afrikan, the official organ of the Republic of New Africa Provisional Government, RNA. Having since read this newspaper, however, I can only say that it has done nothing to change my mind. Indeed, the spring 1989 issue of the New Afrikan appears to have been written with the intent of demonstrating my point. The Republic of New Africa, Publishers of the New Afrikan, is an organization which holds up the opportunistic theory of New Africanism, which argues that Africans within the U.S. have acquired a new identity since our enslavement within the U.S., and that this identity is one that was consolidated in the U.S. South, where the RNA contends our national homeland, the Republic of New Africa, is now located. According to the RNA, this national homeland is consolidated within 5 territorial states of the U.S. upon land stolen from the native people upon whom near genocide was committed in the process. The Republic of New Africa was founded in the late 1960s. It was founded as a generally progressive formation during the context of the revolutionary period of the time. What it attempted to do then was give concrete form to the concept of Black nationalism as had been put forward by Malcolm X, who was murdered by the US government. However, when the founders of the Republic of New Africa adopted the theory of New Africanism, they set themselves on a dead-end course, notwithstanding the generally progressive character of their organization, and position would represent within the context of a period where the main struggle within our movement revolved around differences between the idealist philosophy of integrationism and the growing influence of anti-colonial philosophy, especially as espoused by Malcolm X and Frantz Fanon, a participant in the Algerian Revolution. During this period, the most progressive forces within our oppressed, colonized community existed within the general anti-colonialist or pro-independence tendency. However, although the anti-colonialist tendency was able to sum up the capitulationist line of the integrationists, a summation generally accepted by the broad mass of African workers and poor people, the struggle to identify the class character of the various forces within the anti-colonialist or pro-independence tendency never occurred, and the impression of one generally monolithic revolutionary anti-colonialist movement prevailed. So during this period, it was an interesting kind of split that was emerging within the National Liberation Movement. And the leadership of this tendency has to be identified as Malcolm X, who, while he was a member of for a portion of this time, he was a member of the original Nation of Islam, was somebody who was putting forth a struggle for national liberation that one didn't hear, a revolutionary position around national liberation that one didn't hear within generally speaking, within the Black liberation movement, and one certainly did not hear generally within the Nation of Islam. And what had begun to emerge is that this was a philosophy that Malcolm in particular continuously used to struggle against the integrationist philosophy that was espoused by by Martin Luther King and other sectors of the integrationist or assimilationist tendency. And more people were gravitating toward Malcolm X. The most dynamic sector of the struggle in this country was gravitating more toward Malcolm X and the philosophy, the unfolding philosophy that he was putting forward. And an example of that, of course, was the split within the Nation of Islam itself, finally, where Malcolm went one way and other sectors of the nation, including Louis Farrakhan, Muhammad Ali, the most, the better known, went another way. But Africans generally began lining up, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which can arguably be defined as the most progressive, most dynamic sector of the so-called civil rights movement at that time, had adopted this whole philosophy they call them Black Power. They were really a force that was on the move, and they had begun to court Malcolm X. They had begun to follow Malcolm X too. They had become believers, and even Fannie Lou who became well known as a leader of the civil rights movement, and certainly the 1964 Mississippi Summer Project, became somebody who was a follower of Malcolm X in terms of being able to have greater unity with what Malcolm was talking about as a tendency within our struggle. And you may be able to Google and find this Fannie Lou Hamer on Malcolm X, because she distinguished Malcolm X and Martin Luther King as representatives of different tendencies within the liberation movement itself. So the movement, was moving more and more toward the general population was saying, we ain't turning no cheeks. We believe that Black people, Black power became this really important articulation. So people were moving more toward this camp. And this was an anti-colonialist camp. It wasn't let's go up and take everything we can and integrate with the white people. The movement began to really move toward an anti-colonial politic, but no one has said exactly what that means. It hadn't developed yet. This struggle inside the anti-colonial movement had not matured, and it didn't have time to mature so that we could make distinctions of what the different groups were. For example, there was Floyd McKissick, who was the head of CORE. He united with the Black Power position that came from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. But his unity with it meant that he embraced and was embraced by Richard Milhouse Nixon, who was then the president of the United States, and went into one of the Carolinas, I've forgotten which one, to set up something called Soul City, which was supposed to be this all-Black capitalist-based kind of city, and began to really promote a kind of Black capitalism. And even within SNCC itself, there were differences about what the hell it meant, and there was a lack of clarity in general, except that, again, people had gravitated toward the philosophy that was coming from Malcolm X, but was historically associated with what has come to be known as Black nationalism, anti-colonial movement inside this country. And the reason this struggle could not mature and develop within the struggle, the movement, was that the United States government entered into this debate with guns. And it began the process of assassinations that targeted, different forces, and militarily crushed that sector of our movement that was moving toward this self-determination kind of politic. And it did it in a rather indiscriminate kind of way, because they also killed Martin Luther King. And for what needs to be understood about King is that while a lot of people just like to remember Martin Luther King said, turn the other cheek or some stuff like that, Martin Luther King and what he did was characterized essentially by struggle, by resistance. And so even if it was quote unquote non-violent, but the willingness to disrupt the process, to mobilize thousands of people, and to even challenge certain manifestations of capitalism itself. That's what King did. They didn't shoot King because he said turn the other cheek. They didn't have to. They just let him turn the other cheek and beat him to death. But the fact is that he was involved in mobilizing African people in struggle, and this is part of what made him dangerous. And because the movement began to trend more and more toward anti-colonialism, and King himself would have had to move if he were going to maintain the loyalty of the masses of African people who he had engaged in resistance. So we say that I'm going back up to something that I'd already begun reading, but I just want to make the point. So however, although the anti-colonialist tendency was able to sum up the capitulationist line of the integrationists, that capitulated to oppression, capitulated to white domination. That's what integrationism does. It capitulates to it. And so we were able to sum this up in a summation generally accepted by the broad mass of African workers and poor people. The struggle to identify the class character of the various forces within the anti-colonialist or pro-independence tendency never occurred, and the impression of one generally monolithic revolutionary anti-colonialist movement prevailed. The exception to this, of course, was the attempts made by the Black Panther Party, which was part of the anti-colonialist tendency and represented the closest thing to a revolutionary center ever produced in the country since the Garvey movement. However, the Black Panther Party was trapped by the limitations of the development of our movement and the peculiarity of its own development as a primary component of that movement. Our revolution had only a rudimentary understanding of the question of class and class struggle within our oppressed and colonized communities. Certainly, our revolution did not understand the Marxist theory of primitive accumulation of capital, which misrepresented the history of African people and the other oppressed peoples of the world as simply footnotes to European development and the emergence of white powers, capitalism resting on our oppression and ruthless exploitation. So we didn't know anything about it. We weren't grappling with that question. The biggest thing that we were grappling with is that other tendency, the assimilationists and what have you. So we had a broad group of anti-colonialist, pro-independence folk who were united in opposition to the assimilationists, but these tendencies, the differences within the tendency never got explored in a very serious way, never were allowed to mature. This meant that the Black Panther Party, like the rest of us, could not understand the fact that the class question in the real world is concentrated, centralized in the struggle against colonialism, old and new. Nor did we understand what is called economic dependency, which is simply a manifestation of the structure of the world economy of veiled wage slavery in Europe and North America based on slavery, pure and simple, as experienced by African people and the ruthlessly oppressed and exploited peoples of the world. And we ain't dealing with these questions like this. You know, it was a white man, black man, and, you know, really, it was this kind of understanding, but now there was no depth to it. There was no science that we had really come to understand. The limitations of our movement at the time, the limitation of the Black Panther Party is a central force within our movement, meant that the Black Panther Party was unable to wage a good struggle based on science against the class contradictions within the anti-colonialist or pro-independence tendency of our movement. And the Black Panther Party had this rather oversimplified thing where, you know, Africans who wore dashikis and et cetera were characterized as cultural nationalists, and many were just simply cultural nationalists that were not going to, the only struggle they were going to involve themselves in was trying to make a proper stitch in a dashiki that they were making, or have enough money to buy good dashikis and the sharpest dashikis and stuff like that, and money that they would spend on Swahili classes. they were not engaged in any struggle. They, you know, these cultural nationalists. And so somehow culture alone was what was going to rescue. And so the Panthers correctly summed it up. And of course, they were influenced by Frantz Fanon, you know, like in the struggle. But there was no science there. And, you know, they dealt with groups like Ron Karenga, who they characterized as pork chop nationalists. And, you know, which had a lot to do with a tendency within the nationalist movement, certainly coming from the Nation of Islam about, you know, Muslim and not eating pork and this kind of stuff. And so the Karenga forces were the pork chop nationalists. And when our revolution of the 60s was defeated militarily by the U.S. capitalist colonialist government, many accounts within our own movement went unsettled. That is, ideological accounts. Hence, even today, a leader of or organization willing to represent himself as being African, it's especially important to spell Africa with a K, or for independence or against colonialism or the white man or imperialism, etc., can pass as a revolutionary. That's all you got to do. Spell Africa with a K. You know, be against the white man, and this kind of stuff. Even fast-talking comprador hustlers like the Reverend Jesse Jackson get by without any meaningful official criticism from our movement, and are actively supported by some Black nationalist leaders and groups. Of course, Fred Hampton used to give him hell in Chicago, where he was located, but generally speaking, he got a free ride. Then, due to the influence of Malcolm X and the original Nation of Islam with his do-for-self anti-colonial articulation of the 60s, not only is it taken for granted that Minister Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam, under his leadership, are revolutionary, but it's almost assumed that any Muslim or non-Christian organization is revolutionary. Just to be non-Christian is to be a revolution. To be a Muslim is to be revolutionary. Kwame Ture and the All-African People's Revolutionary Party was able to build this organization in part based on his significance as a leader of the Black Power movement of the 60s. But if it were necessary for Touré and the AAPRP to justify their significance or as revolutionary leaders based on anything said or done since that time, they would be extremely hard pressed. And that is true. They did, for a while, they were doing great African Liberation Day mobilizations, but even you know, at the end of that mobilization, what it did in terms of forwarding the African Revolution, nothing. And they built nothing. So it must be, so it is for most of the anti-colonial movement of today. The anti-colonial movement of today rests essentially on assumptions of the past, which were based on struggles within our movement going unresolved, without being struggled through to useful conclusions necessary for the development and forward motion of our revolution. The Republic of New Africa, which considers its leaders the provisional government of Africans colonized within the U.S., is one of those organizations within the general anti-colonialist or pro-independence movement, which has not had to seriously defend this practice or theory to the masses of our people until now. While we have referred to the RNA's theory as the opportunistic theory of African internationalism, we have actually engaged in an instance of putting words into its mouth. For the truth of the matter is that the RNA, as far as we know, has never put forth a theory of New Africanism as such. It was actually the American Communist Party, under fierce pressure from the then Communist International in 1928, because of its overtly colonialist approach to Africans in the US, that put forth a neo-imperialist, neo-colonialist theory of the forging of a new nation of Black people from the enslaved African population in the Black Belt South. It is this origin of the New African theory that led one leader of the New African People's Organization, NAPO, the self-proclaimed other half of the New African tendency, to claim incorrectly and certainly prematurely that the party had characterized their theory as warmed over Stalinism. We never said that. In its origin, it sounds like, well, in its origin, the theory is opportunistic in that it was part of an effort to destroy the Black liberation movement by the American Communist Party, an organization of mostly unreconstructed white nationalist white people. There are also white nationalist black people, some of whom were in the American Communist Party, then as now, who fought tooth and nail against the great anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist organization of the period, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, UNIA of Marcus Garvey. After having initially, since the 1919-1920 founding, its 1919-1920 founding, declared that African people within the U.S. As having no special interests as a people, the American Communist Party, including the fewer than 50 assimilated Africans within its membership, finally had to concede to the reality that the Garvey movement consolidated before its very eyes millions of black people within the U.S. and around the world recognize ourselves as Africans and recognize Africa as our homeland. Thus, the popular Garvey slogan, Africa for Africans, those at home and those abroad. And so the Communist Party USA was founded in 1919 in this country, the USA. And its first position on African people, the first statement, the first thing it developed on African people was the struggle against Garvey. That was its first position on African people in 1919, was attack on Garvey and the Garvey movement. And as I mentioned, during this time, they had less than 50 people who were members of the Communist Party, American Communist Party. And one of the people who they recruited was a man named Harry Haywood, who would ultimately become the public face. And even going into the 60s, after the effective withering away or loss of influence of the Communist Party USA until we rescued it around the Angela Davis struggle, he was recognized as Harry Haywood as the author of this political line about the Black Belt South. And he authored something something called Black Bolshevik, something to that effect. So Haywood went to his death being recognized by a lot of people as the author. But the book, the political, Haywood was opposed to. Haywood was an African who grew up in an all-white community, who ultimately married a white woman who walked around the Garvey movement to become one of less than 50 members of the Communist Party USA, went to and lived in the Soviet Union for a while, married a Russian woman, and became the spokesperson for this politic after the Congress, Communist International Congress in 1928 put forth this notion that we were around the Black Belt South. He became the public face for that politic. But that's the history of it. He didn't write it. There was a Russian who authored that piece. And that, again, all of this happened as a part of the contest that they were having with Marcus Garvey. So as a part of the general war against the Garvey movement and the philosophy of self-determination for our people, the American Communist Party sought an ideological formula which could take advantage of the aspirations of our people for dignified self-determination while misdirecting and harnessing the revolutionary energy of our people for its own ends. The philosophy of the Black Belt nation of enslaved Africans, transformed into a nation within the southern U.S. who might be granted independence by a post-revolutionary government of white workers, was designed to capture the membership of the Garvey movement that was being crushed under fierce assault from the U.S. government, the NAACP, and the American Communist Party. All of them were attacking the Garvey movement. This white nationalist chauvinism that posed as theory, we call it cotton patch nationalism, within the African People's Socialist Party, was the ideological assault by the U.S. North American left that always accompanies the assault against our movement by the U.S. colonial state itself. The theory of New Africanism is not only opportunistic in its origin as an attack on the actual struggle for African self-determination, It is also opportunistic in its re-emergence as a philosophy of the Republic of New Africa. When we understand opportunism as a political term, and not as a subjective slander, that this becomes easier to understand. By opportunism, we mean the tendency to sacrifice the long-term interest of our struggle for short-term gains for a sector of our movement. In the absence of advanced theory, clear revolutionary theory, to guide our practice, opportunism, often called pragmatism, is inevitable. Any familiarity with the struggle by the various fronts of the white nationalist American movement against the Garvey movement would have required a really close examination of the theory of any African who would resuscitate it for our use in the 60s. Anybody who was familiar with how this whole so-called theory emerged as a part of the struggle against the Garvey movement would really have to be suspicious of this theory that would be resuscitated and put forth in the 1960s. However, if such examination did occur within the RNA, it was not sufficient to prevent its leadership from moving toward satisfaction of its own class-driven needs. Namely, it is the need to satisfy the land hunger of a radical neo-colonial African petty bourgeoisie, which, to realize its aspirations to become the national bourgeoisie, require a land base upon which to set up a black capitalist state. In 1981, I wrote an article for the Burning Spear which summed up the class position of the proponents of the New African theory. The class relationship of the New Africanist theory to the Pan-Africanist theory of Kwame Toure's AAPRP was exposed in that article, an excerpt of which follows, quote, "The black petty bourgeoisie within current US borders finds itself in a peculiar situation. It is a petty bourgeoisie which is part of a domestic colony. That is to say, the people are not colonized on the land of their heritage by foreign oppressors. Therefore, the question of liberation had caused it tremendous confusion. Unlike the petty bourgeoisie on the continent of Africa, it cannot realize its avaricious aims to become the capitalist ruling class by simply chasing foreign oppressors off indigenous land. One sector of the black petty bourgeoisie has capitulated to one or another sector of the US white ruling class, which pays it off in the forms of economic and political privilege, state-supported jobs, prestige, and administrative rights of the colonialist social program designed to pacify the black working class." And that's the assimilations. Those are the people who are in trouble, real big trouble now, that the Democratic Party just lost this election in such a decisive way, and not just lost the election, but lost the election to almost clearly identified white nationalist, populist movement. So they're in trouble now, and they're scrambling now because jobs are going to be lost, privileges are threatened anyway, whether they are all lost or not, which is why Sharpton is having his anti-colonial mobilization on January 14th that will be contesting with what it is that we're doing there, because they're in trouble and they're trying to pull everybody, all the Africans they can, back into the Democratic Party, and they're doing this audition to show their significance to the rulers of this country, and as a necessary part of their efforts to hold on to power. However, there's another sector of the black petty bourgeoisie which, because of its inability or unwillingness, or the unwillingness of the white ruling class to pay it off with privilege, loot, and prestige, or because of its ability to see that the white ruling class has a tenuous future, or both, takes a more militant anti-imperialist posture and is capable of demanding political independence from this system, which does not allow it to realize its bourgeois ambitions. So there's this other tendency, who for a number of reasons, has been pushed toward the movement for liberation and independence. For this last sector of the black petty bourgeoisie, the question of land is supremely important as a base upon which to launch the development of a black bourgeois state. It is a landless social formation which cannot realize its aspiration to become the bourgeoisie without land. In this sense, it is similar to the landless Jewish bourgeoisie, who was prevented from becoming integrated into the national bourgeoisie of Europe, and consequently launched a reactionary nationalistic Zionist movement, which resulted in a partnership with imperialism, the theft of Palestinian land, and the establishment of the illegitimate state of Israel. Because of the contradictions inherent in its landlessness, this sector of the black petty bourgeoisie has been forced to contrive a variety of metaphysical premises upon which to base its claims to land. One faction of this sector has pushed forth a notion which liquidates the history of our struggle by creating an imaginary historical process which forged African people into a new nation since our enslaved arrival to the U.S. It is from this faction that we see variations of the Black Belt South theory being pushed, based on the premise that Africans in the U.S. are no longer Africans, but are now a part of the Negro Nation, and that's one line that had developed, and I forgot the name of the organization, but a guy named Nelson Peary, an African, was the leader of that organization. The Afro-American nation, or the new African nation, etc. Another faction of what we might call the radical patriotic sector of black petty bourgeois nationalists, although as we shall see, it is becoming less radical and patriotic, and its nationalism is becoming increasingly reactionary. While recognizing the historical basis for our African nationality has, unlike the Black Belt South advocates who deny the past, deny the present by liquidating the specificity of our struggle for liberation wherever we are located. This faction simply recognizes Africa as a solution without accurately and definitively posing the question. And this is the AAPRP, which has always been striking, that while they talk about Africa's motherland, etc., they were never able to define the features of imperialism or white power as it applied to the actual existence that we were living with. They were never able to articulate a political line to struggle against this imperialism. In fact, their position was non-struggle, non-confrontation with imperialism. That was their policy, up and down the line, that their only thing was to build the All-African People's Revolutionary Party. That was their line. They would actually kick people out who would engage in actual struggle, because their line did not, their philosophy did not require for an actual engagement, struggle against imperialism. They just talked about imperialism, etc. And so, and you know, by this way, everybody could be, this is a real popular kind of thing, because everybody could be against the white man, everybody could be against imperialism, everybody could be for Africa without doing anything except coming to an annual demonstration that they had, not a demonstration against something or for something, but what was more like a parade and a rally that they held in Washington, D.C. Once a year. That was the only, and the study. They had to attend study groups, etc. No practice, nothing that even tested the theory. And so the significant thing about both factions composing this tendency is that, notwithstanding their militant rhetoric, both leave imperialism, that is to say, the imperialist system of class rule responsible for present-day African oppression and colonization, off the hook. Neither of these factions presupposes an assault on U.S. imperialism, which would destroy the national oppression of African people, as well as the class exploitation of workers, despite the fact that from 90 to 94% of the African population within the U.S. are workers. And when I say that they wouldn't struggle against imperialism, it's not to say they wouldn't fight, because they would. I mean, the Republic of New Africa was known for its willingness to engage the state. I mean, they you know, have had shootouts in Detroit where cops were and agents were either killed or wounded. They've had shootouts in Mississippi, where FBI agents were either killed or wounded. They've gone to prison for that kind of stuff. But struggling against imperialism and struggling against the police or against an act of aggression by the state, that's different. That's a different thing. And there are a number of people who've been willing to fight against the police, but they are not engaged in a struggle against imperialism. In fact, the Pan-Africanists, the All-African People's Revolutionary Party would often complain about our activities that you don't struggle, against the police, you don't struggle against this and that, because the struggle is against, they would say, it's against imperialism. But what we would say is that imperialism manifests itself practically in the lives of African people, the poverty, the brutality, the police murder. Those are expressions of imperialism. So, but we don't say that the only thing we're fighting against is the police. We don't even just say that we're fighting to have our own state. That's not significant. That's why we have this discussion right now, because what to do once you have state power? We look at the continent of Africa, where you got all these so-called independent states, quote, so-called states, but the people are worse off now under the Negroes than they were under direct white power. So we have to go beyond just this question of somebody being black and somebody being white, and beyond the issue of just national liberation, although that's critical for us to discuss and say what kind of society we're building. And this is part of what this discussion is about. So the significant thing about both factions composing this tendency is that notwithstanding their militant rhetoric, both leave imperialism, that's to say, the international system of class rule responsible for present-day African oppression and colonization off the hook. Neither of these factions presupposes an assault on U.S. imperialism, which would destroy the national oppression of African people, as well as the class exploitation of workers, despite the fact that from 90 to 94% of African population within the U.S. are workers. In the event anyone thinks our analysis of the class content of the New Africanism and its organizational manifestation is off base, we finally get to examine the spring 1989 issue of the New African. We want to look in particular at the lead front page article written by Imari Abubakari Obadele, President of the Provisional Government of the Republic of New Africa. The article has several headlines, but it is put forward as a call for true brothers. Another headline reads, "The war on drugs is to save our people and our communities from destruction, even self-destruction." Because the article and general content of the New African is incredible to the extent of disbelief, readers of the Burning Spear are asked to write for copies of the newspaper sold for 50 cents at the following address, and here's the New African P.O. Box 90604, Washington, D.C., etc., etc. What Obadele's article does, nearly 2 full pages of it, is unite with the vicious counterinsurgency being waged against our people by the U.S. government. This counterinsurgency has different components, many of which continue to unfold, but central to it are the neo-colonial strategy. The neo-colonial strategy, which has raised up elements of the domestic African petty bourgeoisie as government officials, administrators, and liberal and civil rights policymakers, and the illegal white capitalist drug economy imposed on our starving community by the legal white capitalists and arms of the U.S. colonial government itself. So we're saying that we're looking at how neocolonialism was being implemented. The imposition of the illegal white capitalist drug economy on our oppressed and starving community has a multifaceted purpose, which includes the infusion of at least $100 billion into the deficit-ridden U.S. economy, the attempted stupefaction of the revolutionary masses of the increasingly starving, homeless, and jobless African working class, and the political justification for ongoing aggressive military assaults against and brutal occupation of our community. So this is what it's about. And you talk about mass stupefaction, that's what the drug thing, part of it is about, stupefying the community. who's in pain. That's what even legalizing marijuana is about, money, and it's about stupefying masses of people, because the only people who really get wasted on this kind of stuff are people who are in pain. And so, I mean, people do, that's like people often recreational drink booze and smoke cigarettes and stuff like that. But you find where the most oppressed sectors of the population is, that stuff doesn't happen in moderation. In fact, it becomes substitute for food, lovers, television, automobiles, houses, and stuff like that is a good hit, is a good high and stuff. And that's what, you know, part of what that was about. While the U.S. government has, I mean, there's no mystery about why the height of the Black Revolution of the 1960s, for example, you know, the whole hippie drug culture, you know, just swept the United States. And many of the people who were critical forces, or some of the people who were critical forces in the 1960s who were not actually physically murdered, found themselves victims of the whole drug economy and the drug culture that was imposed on the African Revolution of the 1960s. Well, the U.S. government has always, and we have that in more than just guesswork. I mean, we can even identify some of the agents by name who participated in shipping the drugs into the African community. And the government, government agencies, et cetera, who were involved in that. While the U.S. government has always been hostile to the interests of African people in Africa and the U.S., it was the unsuccessful Black Revolution of the 60s that made it necessary to create a full-scale counterinsurgency to put down and keep down forever a genuine domestic struggle by African people against U.S. colonial rule over our people and for political independence or self-determination. The military assault on our revolution of the 60s was accompanied by the importation of heroin into our colonized communities and an ideological assault by American white nationalist leftists. Heroin came from Southeast Asia, where the U.S. government was conducting a counterinsurgency against the Vietnamese people who were attempting to end the U.S. colonial occupation of the southern half of their country. By August 1967, the U.S. government had consolidated its counterinsurgency against our people and named it COINTELPRO, an acronym for Counterintelligence Program. The purpose of this counterinsurgency was established for the agents by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, one of the U.S. domestic secret political police agencies, with these words in an internal document later made public by a break-in at the FBI office. Quote, the purpose of this new counterintelligence endeavor is to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize the activities of Black nationalist hate-type organizations and groupings, their leadership and supporters, and to counter their propensity for violence and civil disorder. The activities of all such groups of intelligence interest to this Bureau must be followed on a continuous basis, so we will be in a position to promptly take advantage for counterintelligence and to inspire action in instances where circumstances warrant. The pernicious background of such groups for their duplicity and devious maneuvers must be exposed to public scrutiny, where such publicity will have a neutralizing effect. Efforts of the various groups to consolidate their forces or to recruit new or youthful adherents must be frustrated. No opportunity must be missed to explore through counterintelligence techniques the organizational and personal conflicts of the leadership of such groups, and where possible, an effort should be made to capitalize upon existing conflicts between competing Black nationalist organizations. When an opportunity is apparent to disrupt or neutralize Black nationalist hate-type organizations through the cooperation of established local news media contacts, or through such contacts with sources available to the seat of government, in every instance, careful attention must be given to the proposal to ensure the targeted group is disrupted, ridiculed, or discredited through the publicity and not merely publicized. Consideration should be given to techniques to preclude violence-prone or rabble-rouser leaders of hate groups from spreading their philosophy publicly or through various mass communication media. This is the government talking. It's also talking about its relationship to the media. It says right here, we use the media to do these things. You want to understand why you having such issues with your local media, because your media function as an arm of a state that's determined to keep you from being heard correctly, unquote. Under the general title of Black Nationalist Hate Groups and the subtitle of Racial Intelligence, the counterinsurgency, this counterinsurgency was advanced by the FBI with the following specific goals to be realized according to an August 1967 field directive sent to the FBI field officers throughout the U.S. 1. Prevent the coalition of militant black nationalist groups. A unity their strength, a truism that is no less valid for all its triteness. 2. Prevent the rise of a Messiah who could unify and electrify the militant black nationalist movement. 3. Through counterintelligence, it should be possible to pinpoint potential troublemakers and neutralize them before they exercise their potential for violence. 4. Prevent militant black nationalist groups from gaining respectability by discrediting them to 3 separate segments of the community. 5. A final goal should be to prevent the long-range growth of militant black nationalist organizations, especially among youth. Unquote. This is the framework of a counterinsurgency attack. That this was the one that was under the immediate leadership of the FBI, but the FBI was just one arm of the secret political police that attacks us. And all these programs, and anybody in this country will be out of your mind if you didn't understand that the United States government has a contingency plan to deal with African people in this country. So under this counterinsurgency program of the 60s, our revolution was defeated. And the aspirations of our people for happiness and an end to colonial violence that fills our lives, and end to the poverty associated with our existence as a conquered people, and for self-determination, the right to be self-governing, was set back for many bitter years. Because the Black Revolution of the 60s did acquire organizational representation by political formations who attempted to provide political and ideological leadership for our people's struggle, the focus of the U.S. counterinsurgency, which employed tanks, National Guardsmen, and U.S. regular troops, in addition to the various domestic police agencies against our whole people, its concentration was centered on our organizations and their leaders. However, in an attempt to prevent a recurrence of a revolutionary period within the U.S., the colonialists have focused a broad-based counterinsurgency on the entire domestic African working class as a revolutionary social force whose genuine aspirations can only be realized by revolution. So, you know, we start off with, in our history in this country, counterinsurgency, or the state functioned to oppress the whole African nation, all the Africans who were here. Slavery, all of that, everybody lived under that. Then we went through serious struggles, and we had this whole breakthrough moment. It was disrupted momentarily by the Civil War, the war between white people themselves, and that resulted in the so-called era of Reconstruction, when there was the appearance for about, from 1865 to 1876, of 11 years or so, that Africans had some modicum of freedom through that. And then after 1866, after 1880, 76 elections, then that was kicked out. Ku Klux Klan come again, complete domination of African people with other kinds of laws called Jim Crow, all this other kind of stuff, until this magnificent period that emerged with Garvey, Universal Negro Improvement Association, African people now in motion, striking out again for total independence, total liberation, total self-government, until this movement too was crushed by the United States government that arrested, kicked Garvey out of the country. And all of this is happening with the assistance of Africans in our country. You got to remember that these tendencies that we're talking about, these differences did not just emerge. That for long periods of time, there were people who were accommodations even under slavery, who thought it was a mistake to try to go up against a white man who had, come to a certain kind of, and cooperated and collaborated with the slave masters. And when Garvey is making his move, it's not just that he's making a move to free African people. This is a disruption to the lives and assumptions and privileges of a tiny sector of our African population who benefited from this, who got paid off from white power. So you have that movement. Then Garvey movement, when that was crushed, then you had this, more repression throughout the United States, and then this movement for civil rights, etc., busted open some space again. And then from that, as soon as we got the space, as soon as the political space opened up, boom, African people struggling for what? This civil rights movement then matured into a struggle for black power, for self-determination, etc. And then this too has to be crushed in every instance, it's the struggle for independence, liberation that has to be crushed, by the United States government. The Sharptons can't win against us. The Jacksons can't win against us without the support of the United States government and various of the institutions that support that government, like the media, the police organizations, etc. They don't just, and by the way, in most instances, this is most effective under liberals. It's white liberalism, it's liberal imperialism that prefers neo-colonialism to and uses that as a method. The other imperialism is one that says crush them, kill them, destroy them, etc. That was the Bush kind of imperialism. And that stuff doesn't work. And what happens is it radicalized so many people and pushed them toward independence, toward self-determination. And the liberals say, okay, let's give them self-determination, let's give them independence, let them pick a flag, and let them pick a leader, et cetera, and let's keep the money, keep the economy, keep all this other stuff, and those leaders, those flags will represent us and not them. So we say that thus we have the neo-colonial component of this counterinsurgency, which mobilizes a traitor sector of the domestic African petty bourgeoisie against the African working class in the interest of colonialism, and as another component of the imposition of an illegal white capitalist drug economy on our working class communities. It's really important to say that they went hand in hand, even with black nationalists. They can put the drugs in there. They got a neo-colonial component that calls itself black nationalists and patriot, and all this other kind of stuff, but never attacks imperialism. Instead, what does it do? It attacks the community, it attacks the people and whatever. That's what we're talking about. That's why we're saying it's opportunism, rank opportunism. So, but let's say more about this. So thus we have the neo-colonial component of this counterinsurgency, which mobilizes traitor sector of the domestic African petty bourgeoisie against the African working class in the interest of colonialism as another component of the imposition of an illegal white capitalist drug economy on our working class communities. This drug economy causes a tremendous violent destabilization of our community and provides the colonial state the necessary political cover for a massive ongoing public military mobilization against the impoverished African working class. Thus, both the drugs in our community as well as the colonialist war against drugs are part of the U.S. counterinsurgency designed to keep our revolution down. The RNA clearly participates in this counterinsurgency on the side of the white ruling class colonial state. Overdeli's article in the spring 1989 issue of the New African makes this excruciatingly clear. This article begins, quote, On a chilly evening last month, the newspaper is undated, so it's unclear what month is referred to here. Members of Block 12 of the Lamont Riggs Citizenship Association in Northwest Washington, D.C., under the leadership of Sister Margie Word and her husband, the husband-wife team of attorney Nikichi Taifa and brother Kofi Kuso, two officials in the RNA provisional government, staged a flashlight-waving exuberant rally and march to, quote-unquote, reclaim our streets and our playground from the scourge of drugs. For 90 minutes that evening, the youthful drug dealers yielded their custom marketplace in the shadows of the playing field. Mrs. Word's march, supported by many neighbors and city councilpersons, Charlene Drew Jarvis, who lives in the neighborhood, and John Ray, as well as the young, stern-faced police precinct captain, mirrored efforts by Black people, new African people throughout the land to take direct action to fight back against drugs, to prevent teen pregnancies, and otherwise stop our people's disastrous disintegration. Our people's determination is the good news. There is a national effect, that is, an effort on the Black or New African nation across this land, a passionate determination to resist destruction and build a good future. There is a national movement among us and the beginning of a national strategy. Unquote. So according to the president of the provisional government of African people colonized by the worst imperialism ever known to humanity, this neo-colonialist march, supported by armed representatives of U.S. white power and a young stern-faced police precinct captain, is part of a national movement and the beginning of the national strategy to stop our people's disastrous disintegration. What a remarkable statement. Overdeli has accepted the general line of the white ruling class put forward by, so like we're involved in some kind of disastrous disintegration. I mean, what is that? What the hell is it? I mean, that's incredible. That's incredible. But you hear that even today, that somehow, and so not imperialism, not colonialism, we just disintegrate, right? You know, we just involved in a national disintegration. What an incredible statement. Overdeli has accepted the general line of the white ruling class put forward by the Black petty bourgeoisie, which defines the current conditions of existence of our people as due to some behavioral problem on our part. This line defines the vast majority of the African people here as a permanent underclass, whose wretched condition is self-inflicted, caused by hostility to the work ethic, teenage pregnancies, and other equally nonsensical ruling class fabrications. If the above quoted passage of this article does not make this clear, then certainly his collaborationist opportunist so-called national strategy, as revealed in the following passage in his article, would clear up any doubts. Quote, our national strategy lacks perhaps two essential ingredients. First, the resources needed to increase success of all the local efforts and link them across the land. Second, true men with guns who serve the people. Mrs. Word, however, speaking her warming words to the chill night and the gathered neighbors, told of the ingredients of our national strategy, which we already have in place. The offer of love, coupled with the warning that the unreconstructed lawless ones must be made to face the sure retribution and removal which is possible through the structure of the state as it exists today. What a hell of a way to say we're gonna put you niggas in jail. Unquote. So there it is, plain and simple. Obadele's national strategy requires 1, resources, 2, true men with guns, and 3, an offer of love coupled with sure retribution and removal of the unreconstructed lawless one through the structures of the state as it exists today. Put plain and simple, Obadele's so-called national strategy is the same as George Herbert Walker Bush, the U.S. CIA president, and William Bennett, the so-called drug czar. Concretely, Obadele calls for money, armed men, and police and imprisonment of our people by the U.S. colonial government, which is the structure of the state as it exists today. To make sure you understand what his intent is, Obadele gives an example of why armed black men, he refers to them as an army of true brothers, are needed not to fight the occupying colonial army known as police, in whom this article shows maximum confidence, but to fight against our own oppressed people, particularly the young Africans. Quote, this is Obadele again. Leaders of the youthful playground drug dealers had left their accustomed turf during the march, but they had not retreated far. One, about 25 years old, stood in the mouth of an alleyway as the marchers went by. When the brothers from the Nation of Islam approached and talked with him and others, this young dealer opened his coat and easily displayed a large gun in his waistband. The policeman nearby looked on. He said and did nothing at this bold display of an illegal weapon, perhaps to avoid crossfire and danger to the many people on the street. Since when has an element of the colonial occupying army ever hesitated to shoot for fear of hitting some African in the crossfire? Clearly, however, the needed element of our black national strategy is an army of true brothers with adequate firepower and clear mission. That mission being to serve the people, who will meet with retribution those unreconstructed merchants of death who, with their arms, would intimidate us, would intimidate Mrs. Word and all of us, unquote. So here we have the RNA, Nation of Islam, Negro colonialist politicians, and a stern-faced police precinct captain on one side, and the unconstructed lawless ones on the other. We ask our readers to determine for yourselves whether it is possible to be on the side of the armed representative of the white ruling class colonial state and still be on the side of our people who were crushed down to the bone by colonialism. Can there be any doubt that Obadele and RNA are participating hand in glove with the current counterinsurgency being waged against our people? Check this out. First, Obadele and the RNA clearly attempt to take advantage of the U.S. government-induced fears caused by the destabilization within our community due to the imposition of the drug economy. Instead of exposing the colonial government's counterinsurgency, moving to organize the so-called unreconstructed lawless ones for the revolution, and struggling against the U.S. colonialist government in defense of our national democratic rights to facilitate revolution, Obadele abdicates this leadership to those forces who function within the political economy created around what is referred to as the drug problem. Furthermore, revealing his reliance on the U.S. colonial government or the structure of the state as it exists today, Obadele writes, quote, the question of jobs linked, of course, to education for post-industrial society and the demands of a world in change will not yield to neighborhood solutions. This is a challenge requiring a larger arena. In the United States, federal and state policies must change. Nothing holds so much promise for us as our work through the provisional government to create an independent new African state where we can motivate and educate our people and produce goods and trade with the world on terms favorable to ourselves, just as the Canadians, with less population than we, and the Japanese do. However, mothers and fathers and family members who wage secret, desperate battles for the souls of brothers and sisters, sons and daughters addicted, who rob and lie and misuse those who love them and try to help them, are assisted here and there by churches and valiant private organizations offering treatment and support. There are also groups who struggle daily to keep young men from addiction. This side of the battle could be helped by more resources. Unquote. Now we get to the essence of Obadiah's work for the U.S. government's counterinsurgency, the quid pro quo, so to speak, the you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back opportunism that offers our revolution up for sale by a sector of our community, which in the name of self-determination and the fairyland based new African state puts itself forward as willing to police our people for U.S. imperialism, aka white power, Uncle Sam, the white ruling class, etc. Here are Obadiah's words explaining how these resources are to be acquired. Quote, Brother Vincent Godwin, a RNA legislative representative from DC who is working with Professor James Turner and Attorney Adjoa Ayatoro, and teacher PAC representative Dr. Nana Seshiba to create a national lobbying group for reparations, payment for slavery, recently said, quote, this campaign for reparations should and can be won, not simply because the U.S. Congress has voted $20,000 for each American resident Japanese still living who was held in a U.S. concentration camp during World War II, and not only because they owe us for 200 years of something worse than concentration camps, but because we can use the money. All of the groups fighting courageous, sometimes solitary battles against drugs and all the other ills that beset us as a people could use reparations to give their efforts a boost that could bring greater success. The groups ought to begin sending us their projected budgets, plans for how they would use the resources of reparations in their programs to make a difference in people's lives. We need to show Washington ourselves that reparations now would fill important needs. Obadiah's RNA, unquote. Obadiah's RNA is not demanding reparations. It is begging for a payoff for complicity in the counterinsurgency against our people. Their so-called reparations campaign, which limits U.S. damages to our people to payment for slavery, liquidates the just political charges by our people against the U.S. government for a host of crimes, which includes the attack on our right to self-determination that would be the basis for the existence of a provisional government. Hence, the U.S. should pay reparations to African people, not only because they owe us, but because we can use the money. In order to get the needed money, Obadiah calls on the forces within our community who are active components of the government's counterinsurgency. Here, we are not talking about good intentions, the road to hell being paved with them. All the groups fighting courageous, sometimes solitary battles against drugs and all the other ills, sick, that beset us as a people. To unite under the RNA's leadership to show Washington that reparations would fill important needs. There is a hustle. And it's one that this whole weed and seed thing that the U.S. government uses, that they will give you some money in what they call targeted areas that they define as a criminal area, and then they use all these federal government forces to oppress. This is they have this, a federal program called Weed and Seed, that you can put in your grant, your request for a grant to do some kind of anti-drug, anti-crime, anti-other kind of program in your community. And it enlists support from sectors of the African community to work against the African population. So you got these starving people now who are vying for some money from the United States government that can be used to attack other black people. That's the same thing. That's what Weed and Seed. They said they might have got it from Obadiah. They might have got the program from this. Contrast this new African opportunism, which dances to the tune of the white ruling class in order to show Washington that reparations would fill important needs, with a revolutionary approach to the question of reparations. On November 13, 1982, the African People's Socialist Party convened the first international tribunal on reparations for African people in the U.S. in Brooklyn, New York. Immediately following the tribunal, which we organized as a means of developing a focus for our anti-colonialist tendency, reorganizing the masses of our people dispersed since the defeat of Black Revolution of the 60s, winning international support for our struggle against U.S. colonialism and seizing the initiative from colonialists, the party organized the African National Reparations Organization. So that's what we did. That was the motive of what we did. November 13, 1982. NRO is a mass organization originally conceived as one in which the pro-independence or anti-colonialist movement would struggle through our land differences while generally uniting around the struggle for reparations, an old demand in our community in point 11 of our party's revolutionary 14-point working platform. The unresolved questions within the anti-colonialist movement prevented this working unity from occurring within NRO. It is currently improperly a mass organization under the leadership of the party. However, it is a mass organization. It relies on a victory. It relies on a victory for the reparations demand, not on convincing Washington that reparations would fill important needs, but on winning the masses of African working people to an understanding that reparations now is a just demand to be fought for and acquired. NRO attempts to organize African people throughout the U.S. into chapters of a mass political organization capable of exercising the will of our colonized people. In October 1982, the party made a last-ditch effort to have the anti-colonialist movement assume official sponsorship of the World Tribunal and the call to build NRO. A meeting was called in Brooklyn with representatives of the various organizations which constitute the so-called pro-independence tendencies within the U.S. Included in those invited was Overdeli, who, rather than unite with our effort, made a 15-minute speech against an article in the Burning Spear which disagreed with the theory of New Africanism and walked out. Should say stalked out, stormed out, etc. Since that time, NRO has sponsored 6 other reparations tribunals in 6 other states, attended by Africans from throughout the U.S. The party has written extensively around this question in the Burning Spear, published pamphlets and books on the subject, with won international support for reparations from Barbados to Senegal, England, and Ireland, held protests demanding reparations around popular mass causes in the U.S. where we do work, etc. We have even spoken of reparations at an RNA-sponsored Nation Day event in Washington, D.C. However, the RNA and the other New Africanists always refuse to join our efforts to win reparations, which the party sees as a demand which must be subordinate to the immediate aim of our revolution to overthrow U.S. colonialism. The RNA and the New Africanists refuse to join an effort to win reparations based on the centrality of the independently organized oppressed mass of African working people. In fact, the RNA and New Africanists barely even paid lip service to the demand for reparations except when they spoke or appeared otherwise at NRO-sponsored tribunals, until the U.S. government agreed to pay reparations to the surviving Japanese who were interred in U.S. concentration camps during the Second Imperialist War. This is when the U.S. government made the RNA a functional believer in reparations. It was following this that Overdeli founded his lobbying group, in quotes, effort to gain reparations. The bankruptcy revealed in the extensively quoted New African is the natural consequence of an opportunist theory functioning politically as opportunism all down the line. Our people demand better than this. Our revolution demands better than this. The African People's Socialist Party will fight to build a revolutionary movement under the leadership of our revolutionary party. In order to move forward as a movement, as a party, we must draw lines of demarcation between that which is revolutionary and that which sells out the revolution in the name of revolution. We call on all party members to struggle vigilantly to hold up the banner of African internationalism and to live up to the title of African internationalists. We call on all the honest forces who recognize the need for a genuine revolutionary party in order to accomplish the immediate task of overthrowing U.S. colonialism, as well as the accomplishment of the total liberation and unification of Africa under an all-African socialist government, to join our efforts to build and consolidate the party. Uhuru. So, comrades. We've got 20 minutes or so that we can use to discuss this, to break from the monotony of my simply reading this stuff and talk about it. Hopefully people will have already done some reading before we got here and have an array of questions and interventions that you want to make. So I want to throw it open for discussion, and everyone is muted, but you can unmute yourself by doing star what?
Star 5. Was it star 6? Star 6, I'm sorry.
By doing star 6. So you can unmute yourself by doing star 6 in order to participate. Let me just, before you do that, let me just say this, that I have listed here as participants on the phone, Alienza, Maureen, what was that, Mama Africa in the Bronx, what was that? Mike Love, Star, Christian, Kalunda, Ona, Makda, Fosia, Penny, Stephanie, Kwabena, Muteba, Timba, Desun, Ntambwe, Ali, Kefing, Chimarenga, Elikia, Brenda Lent, Unique, Ruby, Adisa, somebody's name that I wrote that I can't read, Jackson, Rafiq, Benita, Oteka. Can those who I did not hear, can you say your name?
This is Chicago.
This is who out of Chicago? Sifu. Yeah. Anyone else? Foots. Foots. Okay. Who is that with you, Foots?
Toupee.
Toupee.
Yeah. Toupee's from Abdep.
Okay, Toupee. Okay, because you, I never did notice that about your hair. Who else? Who was the man? Said something?
Sound like a Nico.
Aniko. Okay, Aniko. Aniko. Oh, okay. Okay. Kunde. Oh, who are Kunde? Mother Warrior. Who else? Who is that? Someone said something after Kunde. Who was that?
Aisha. Oh, Aisha.
Aisha. Okay. Anybody else? You have something on?
It's Geneva, Raya, Johan, Virginia, Stars.
What are they on?
YouTube.
That's YouTube. Okay. Yeah.
September.
Okay. I'm just trying to get those on the phone. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uhuru. Yeah.
If that's the case, we got Badori.
I'm not going. Okay. Uhuru Ghazi. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and open it up for discussion. I know there are a lot of people on YouTube, and I think on Facebook as well. So I agree.
Chairman.
Yes.
Chairman, good morning. Carol, I just wanted to put this pose to you, twofold question. In light of the Black is Back Coalition meeting just recently, have you by any chance seen the Teddy Bourgeois State of the Black Nation that convention that just was held? And number two, have you noticed that over the last couple of years, the white left and a lot of academics have been trotting out France Fanon as some sort of new revolutionary messiah?
So what were you? I didn't understand the first part of the question had to do. Is this Sifu?
Yes, sir.
And what was the first part? What was the first thing you raised? By the paper
Well,
fuzzy?
the first question was, had you seen or heard about this Save Black Affairs convention that went down? I believe it was in Washington, D.C., probably a week ago, by the Pay Bush White Negroes, led by Ron Daniels and a few others. In light of the Black is Back Coalition's meeting just recently.
Yeah, I'm aware of that, and it's interesting because I know Ron Daniels and some of the others who participated, but I have not had an opportunity to look at it. I understand that they sent out some kind of summation. Someone pointed that out to me yesterday, but I haven't looked at it at all. But I'm aware of it, and I know the politics that's associated with it. And this is one of the most important things that we're talking about, because there will be radicals. And Ron Daniels became, for many people, best known because of his participation in the work to build the, what was that, some kind of independent political party. I forgot what it was called now. But actually, the muscle and the organizational coherence and leadership of that depended on the Socialist Workers Party, the White Left. Well, I think it was SWP. He was SWP of one of the other White Left organizations, and I know Ron. I've known him for years and years, and so I know what kind of politics they represent. And it's not about seizing power at all. It's not about because Black Power can be an easy slogan, and independence be an easy slogan if you don't plan to do it, if you don't plan to govern, if you don't have a plan to take and wield political power, then it's meaningless gibberish, So yeah, I know about what it is they did, and yeah, I can see how some people would be white leftists would either love Fanon. Fanon was important to our revolution for a number of reasons. A critical thing that made Fanon important was that his emergence as a force that struggled, that really upheld violent revolution, who sang the praises of the cleansing benefits of revolutionary violence to kill the oppressor and what have you. And this at a time where our movement was still hung up on this whole question of nonviolence and, you can't hurt the oppressor stuff. And so Fanon, coming out of the Algerian Revolution and a Black man, had an amazing impact. And, he was brilliantly clear on that and certain other questions. But for Fanon, and I can see how they could be fascinated with Fanon, because even Fanon did not concentrate much on the question of taking political power, Africans assuming that, and what it would take for Africans to assume power. And there's a way that Fanon can be really loved by anarchists and people who are wedded to anarchy. Well, we're not anarchists, but we really love Fanon's introduction in a very brilliant way. The need for the violent overthrow of our oppression, and how the colonized can only be cured through killing the colonizer. And so he's won our heart forever, and he belongs to us, notwithstanding what the white leftists want to do with him. He's ours. We should tell him, shut up, and if you say anything about it again, we'll slap you. Uhuru, come on, comrade, let's talk. Desun.
Uhuru,
Yeah.
with mobilizing massive amount of people and challenging the system in some sort of way, even though the demands aren't revolutionary, do you see the Black Lives Matter movement being similar to the movement that MLK led, or what are some major differences that you see between the two?
No, I mean, King did have a movement with certain kinds of objectives, whether you united with them or not. And the Black Lives Matter movement doesn't have anything approximating the influence that Martin Luther King and SCLC through King had at that time. One would be hard pressed to say what the objectives of the Black Lives Matter, even though I know they put something called Black Movement for something,
Movement for Black
for Black Lives. But even that doesn't give you, inform you. I mean, to be for certain kinds of issues, against certain kinds of conditions, is not to say what it is that you're fighting for and what your ultimate aims are. And the Black Lives Matter cannot say what the ultimate aim, even if it's fantastic, like this notion of black people and white people being together in this new, fairyland or something like that. That's not even, it doesn't even go to that extent. And so the Black Lives, it's entirely different. It has, and it's not that kind of mass movement. No, it's not. I mean, the civil rights movement in this country was something that affected every sector of the community, and it was opposed by almost all of the establishment leaders. Almost all of them opposed the civil rights movement, including people who ended up giving King awards and stuff like that. When that movement was there, they were opposed to it. Now you've got a movement that has been from its very inception embraced by certain sectors and led by certain sectors of the white ruling class. So it's an entirely different thing. And anybody else?
Living in my classroom, Africa would like to speak for 1 second.
Who is this one? Speak for 1 second.
Living my classroom from Mama Africa in the Bronx.
Okay. Yes, please.
Thank you. I was just responding to the discussion about Black Lives Matter. From what I've read in the past couple months, a group of white liberals got together and did funds. It's somewhere between $100 million and $200 million. And BLM activists, organizations that are BLM affiliated, can approach this fund for money through their network. So someone who is just a regular organizer can't really go in and apply for a grant. You have to be in the network. This money is supposed to be used to work against racism in the police department. This is my understanding. That is basic understanding. It's not studied anyway.
Right.
And aside from that, I just want to say thank you so much for this platform. That's my words. Thank you.
Well, hold on. Thank you. I want to say that there is I've heard of I don't remember if I heard of an exact sum of money, and I'm not sure if I heard that this money had been actually established and put forth, but I am aware of vaguely aware of a kind of thing that is occurring where money is being accumulated for the exact purpose that's being talked about here, to be given to particular groups to fund the struggle against racism and what have you. And I do know that Soros, the billionaire, the Ford Foundation have given millions and millions of dollars to the Black Lives Movement network, or however you want to characterize it. It's not even like an organization like that King led. The Black Lives Movement is not like that. I mean, it's but that I know that did happen. I was in Ferguson when the money started flooding in, when whole buildings were secured for occupation by all of these forces, where trainers were sent in to teach people how to fight against racism. And that's like from the position of the U.S. state and government, and from the billionaires and the foundations that have that kind of money to spend. It's like them being Mike Tyson, who's paying people how to fight against him. You understand what I'm saying? And that's exactly what they're doing. So they say, yeah, we are fighting. Yeah, we fight like hell. We are fighting. We fight like hell. But you're using as your foundation, as your guiding influence, the strategy that was given to you by the very same forces that you should, in fact, be fighting against. And that preserves the system. What it does is it corrals all this energy of people who want to fight against white power. It corrals them to benefit white power. So they're spinning their wheels like hell. They're on this treadmill that never goes. You can run like hell. You can turn it up maximum speed, and you're just running, but there is no destination that you will ever achieve. The only thing you do is run yourself out of energy etc. And that's what this whole thing is doing, trying to do right now. And that's what Sharpton is doing on January 14th, because the Democratic Party has made a whole bunch of Negroes superfluous and to reinvent themselves, to give themselves new life, to try to pull together the Democratic Party and show that they are significant to this whole process of controlling African people in the face of the Black is Back coalition going to Washington, D.C. On January 14th to put forth a Black agenda for self-determination, to rally for self-determination. Sharpton goes and puts something, together for January 14th, we shall not be moved. And so, the Democratic Party is going to provide buses and the labor unions associated with the Democratic Party, they're going to do everything to get people there to Sharpton not to move. And the problem that Africans have is that you ain't moved a single step since 1950-something. And we need self-determination today, just like we needed, when we first got captured here. Anybody else? Comrades?
I'm coming, sir.
Yes, comrade.
Yeah, I think it's important that we explain this whole thing of actually, ideological struggle, especially, with people like Imaro, but then even spiritual ideological struggle we made against over there in 2010. We printed a eulogy in the Bergen newspaper. In 1980, myself and another come back from the party, went to get him out of the federal penitentiary. So then I guess the question becomes, you make up a little theological struggle, and then you call police forces to unite. One, we call on them to build an African national prison organization in a press unity, which they failed to do.
Yeah.
But I think that the difference between our ability to do that is because early on we had put together a paper called Tactics and Strategy. It's very powerful for the unity putting the forefront of establishing the leadership of the foreign intelligence. So that was exactly what we were attempting to do there. And more than that, the studies because that liberalism that has so played the Black Panther Party, when you got all these differences and don't nobody say nothing about them, you ain't gonna everything is on the door and end up and let the police get in your business. So point being is that there's no bad thing wasting and like we do practice how international has shown has risen to the top.
Yeah, I think it's important. I mean, it's interesting because that Obadele is split up inside the Republic of New Africa. Obadele went to prison, and he went to prison, I think, because of that shootout they had in Mississippi when they were attacked by the FBI. And I think an FBI agent may have been killed or something to that effect. But Obadele went to federal prison, and that is the state as it currently exists. Put him in prison. And because the split had occurred in the Republic of New Africa, Obadele was afraid for his life and called on us to come get him when he got out of prison. And K-Fing was one of the people who went to pick him up from the instrument of the state as it currently exists, and brought him out. But there were others part of this statement that K-Fing made, that we worked with them to try to build a movement against prison. Our objective was to try to unite the broad anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist anti-colonial sector, the pro-independent sector of the movement. And this was to use that to give it coherence so that it could be successful in this war that we had, that was ideological war we were engaged in with the white left that Comrade Sifu is talking about, and with the assimilationists. You know, we had been kicked to the curb, and we in the process of trying to rebuild a revolutionary movement for self-determination. So we say, let's pull everybody together within this broad tendency of self-determination, build a prison movement, because we got so many people who are locked up in prison, not just Africans in general, but people who have been involved in the movement. They're stuck in these prisons and what have you. Build a reparation movement, because everybody say they for reparation as a part of this tendency. Pull it together, and then, you know, build a movement around that, and that struggles to defend the anti-colonial sector of the movement. But the class question continued to kick us in the teeth, because no matter how as hard as we would work, we would always get double-crossed, betrayed by sectors of the African petty bourgeoisie who led these anti-colonial black nationalist movements. The question of ideological struggle is a critically important struggle. It's not just something you engage in because you don't like somebody, or, you know, it's not even a subjective kind of thing. It's not something like that. It's really to achieve political and ideological clarity that informs the revolutionary movement, because the stuff that Obadeli was talking about, that I quoted from and told people how to go get the newspaper in our article, that stuff is a practical political manifestation of their theory. That's the point that I want to make, that we believe that what you do in practice, your practice is informed by your theory. And you know what African internationalism stands for, not because of what we say, but because we do, because you can see clear manifestations of our philosophy on the ground. You can see it in Stockholm, you can see it in London, you can see it, you know, like in South Africa, you can see it in our institutions that we've created, moving us towards self-determination. Otherwise, it's just a damn discussion. And we're not in it for the discussion. The struggle is to achieve political power, to take power and wield this power in the benefits of the masses of our African people, and especially the most despised and most oppressed sector of our population, who've done all this work, who've created a whole economy and life for white people, for a social system that can only exist as sucking our blood. So you can know who we are because you can see what it is that we do in the real world, and that's what we say about theory. Theory has to inform practice, and if it can't be implemented, if it's not something that you can actually implement, then it's no good. And, you know, like we have a saying that, and Marx said something to the effect that the philosophers have only explained the world in certain ways. The real task is to change the world. And if you got a damn explanation that can't be used to explain, I don't care how brilliant it is. I don't care. You might be the most magnificently said, brilliant statement, but okay, having said that, how do we use this to change anything? How does this help to change? And if it can't be practiced, like this woman who was a geneticist, something to that effect, Frances Cress Wilson. You know, please mute, comrades, mute. If you know, who talked about white people being mutations. I mean, she just comes to some really clever, you know, scientific stuff. Okay, after having said that, how do we change the world? And there's no answer to that. It's meaningless. I don't care how smart it sounds. I don't care how brilliant it is. If it doesn't lead up, Umar says change the world by giving them some money to build a university sometime, someplace, you know, on earth, you know. But that's how, you know, that doesn't, you know, how do you change the world? That's the question. How does this, what you just said, not just explain the world, but how does it help us to change the world? Because that's what our task is. If it can't be applied in practice, then it's meaningless.
Right.
Uhuru, yes.
Hold on.
Yes.
Yeah, we got one on Facebook. He's a new African. He says his name is John Egan.
Let's do that.
All callers are muted.
All right, John Egan. Not clear how New Africanism is opportunistic when it is clearly repressed by dead. It moved that quick. I'm sorry.
What?
I said it says not clear how New Africanism is opportunistic when it is clearly repressed by colonial powers and supported by liberation movements worldwide. This is.
Well, I don't know the liberation movements worldwide that he's talking about, and you don't have to be revolutionary to be repressed by the imperialist powers. Right. Jomo Kenyatta was put in jail, and he was a skunk. And there are others that we can name who actually got in trouble, put in jail, etc. Because you can disrupt the program, you can upset the system, even if you're not a revolutionary. The question is, where is it that you're going? What makes it opportunist is because it sells out the long-term interests of African people. For example, even if you say, all right, it's opportunist because this land is the land of the indigenous people who are at Standing Rock now trying to fight just to have clean water. It's a land that was taken by white power, and to say that I'm involved in a movement to take a part of this land, that is the land of the indigenous people, whatever your intentions are, objectively, you are uniting with the system that's keeping this land away from the people from whom it was stolen. So that's part of what makes it opportunist. Another part of what makes it opportunist is the fact that African people cannot solve our problem by taking 5 states, 1 state, or however many states here in the United States, because we don't suffer as Black people who just popped up here in the United States. Right. We suffer as Africans who are a part of a process that robbed Africa, that we are in the United States as a consequence of an assault on Africa. So even if it were possible for you to take 5 states here in the United States, then what does that mean for the entire African world? You know, it doesn't mean anything. We are part of a greater process than that. And so to be able to really win is to have a fix on the long-term aims of the African Revolution. And the long-term aims of the African Revolution has to be the liberation of Africa, African people, and the unification of Africa and African people worldwide. That's what we have to be fighting for. That has to be what our aims revolve around. And so that's why we're saying that. And then I think it would be helpful if this brother who is defending New Africanism would also denounce what we just read about Imari Obadele, who was the high priest at that time of the New Africanist movement in this country. Uhuru.
Actually, he thinks that it's sad.
He thinks it's what?
He said, this is truly sad. You take a couple of parts from an old newsletter to make your analysis of the RNA versus hundreds of other works and political analysis done by New Africans. This is disrespectful to the New African prisoners of war and political prisoners, some who are still in the belly of the beast because they fought against U.S. imperialism and colonialism.
And most of whom have been defended by the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement better than anybody else. I just mentioned we went and picked up Obadele when he got out of federal prison. It was the party that did that. Not a New Africanist, but the African People's Socialist Party, African Internationalists. When Imari Obadele got out of prison, we were there to pick him up. We defended and always defended, even when the New Africanist movement, the RNA was incapable of defending itself because of the repression that you're talking about. It was the African People's Socialist Party. It was African People's Socialist, in every instance that said that what we have to do is to hold up the entire anti-colonial movement in this country. So this is not some naked, blatant attack on New Africanists. It's saying that as a part of a tendency for self-determination, it's dead end. It's a dead end street. And as opposed to dealing with in very subjective fashion, what I would like for you to do is to examine the analysis that's been put forward and then make your argument based on that analysis.
Yes.
Is there anybody else? Yes.
We got 3 minutes this time.
We have to move it out. I understand I've been given a disciplinary notice. So I really appreciate this. I hope that people will read this even before. And I appreciate this brother who just came on. I just wish that what I want you to hear is that this is not just some kind of blaming somebody, casting aspersions. That almost everything that we say, we try to give the basis for why we say it. Right. We try to lay out, this is how we came to these conclusions. It would be helpful if somebody would debate this question as opposed to simply acting in a subjective and reflexive kind of form. And we support all of those comrades you're talking about who are in prison, who call themselves New Africanists. They're black people, they're Africans. Well, they ain't no newer than the Africans who popped up, hundreds, thousands of years ago on the continent of Africa, same African. And what that New African stuff does is it falls into that whole thing of making Africans who left Africa disappear. Right. There used to be some Africans, but now we sort of disappeared. We are Africans, and we claim not Mississippi or something like that. We claim 12 million square miles of richness that all the powers on earth right now are doing everything they can to exploit even more so that they can either keep what they've got afloat or to build themselves to be something else. And here we are fighting over indigenous people's land when all of that land and resources belong to Africa and African people worldwide. That's a huge mistake. Mm-hmm. So listen, but we come back next Sunday. And next Sunday, we'll be looking at the next chapter of this book. And that's entitled "The Revolutionary Party is the Vehicle for Making the Revolution." And that starts on page 49, and you should get that any day now. So here's what I need to announce. That people know, most people on this call know in this meeting that the African People's Socialist Party has a plenary coming up January 7th and January 9th, through January 9th. And the plenary is a really important thing. It's entitled "Putting Revolution Back on the Agenda." That's the title, rather. And the plenary is an extraordinarily significant thing. This is the third plenary from the 6th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. We have a Congress, and in that Congress, we laid out a 5-year plan. And we've been working actually since 2010. We've been working from the 5th and 6th Congress with a plan that we're constantly struggling to implement. And one of the places where we are now that is very clear is that we live in a whole world where nobody's even talking about revolution anymore. Revolution is not even on the agenda. Not only is it not on the agenda in this country because Black Lives Matter, etc. But it's not, nobody's talking about revolution on the planet. Nobody, no country can you hear people talking about revolution. And revolution is good, it's wonderful, etc., because it's the only means by which the oppressed can actually come to power, overturn the systems that oppress us and come to power as a people and certainly as a class. So we're going to be summing up our work, the 5-year plan that we've been working with. And as I said, this is going to be the third of those plenaries. And we'll be looking at where it is that we have to go. I think it's going to be an extremely important meeting, and that people everywhere should go ahead and register for this plenary by going to APSP Plenary, PLENARY.org, APSP Plenary, PLENARY.org. And those of you who had planned to come, if you haven't registered, go ahead and do that now, please. It's really important. APSP Plenary, PLENARY.org. And also, everybody here needs to be registering for the Black is Black Coalition, where we're having a rally for self-determination in Washington, D.C. on January 14th. So just a week after the beginning of the plenary, we're going to be in Washington, D.C. And it's a rally for Black self-determination. Black is Back, that is Black is Back Coalition is sponsoring that, but it's also a statement in the face of what happened to the Democratic Party fiasco in Clinton and the rise of Donald Trump. Our statement is Black is Back. And we want people to make a conscious decision to do this because we're in a real contest now. Whether or not we're still going to be led down this whole dead-end street by the likes of Al Sharpton, or whether or not we're going to allow, promote the rise of genuine forces who've been out there in this world trying to make this struggle. Everybody from Nellie Bailey out of Harlem, from incredibly significant forces like Columbai out of St. Louis, Ferguson area, people like Glenn Ford and people like M1 from Dead Prayers will be doing the culture and what have you. Charles Barron, the state assemblyman out of New York. Real honest forces who want to make this revolution or who want to fight for a real transformation for African people will be there, as opposed to charlatans and hustlers like Al Sharpton and every Negro preacher he can find will be there with him. So, and as I said, the Democratic Party going to provide buses, they're going to provide all kinds of means by which to get them there to hold up the Democratic Party is what they're holding up, and to simply be against Trump, but for what? And we're saying that this is the contest that we're in. It's a splendid opportunity for all of us who really want to see the struggle for self-determination open in an honest and quality way to come to Washington, D.C. And you can go to blackisbackcoalition.org, blackisbackcoalition.org, register, blackisbackcoalition.org. And you can also register for this study. O'Malley taught me for next Sunday's study. And go to O'Malley taught me eventbrite.com. Is that right? O'Malley taught me, O-M-A-L-I, O'Malley taught me, .eventbrite.com. Once you register, the study materials will be instantly emailed to you. So go ahead and do that. I want to, yes, come in.
I think we got a little more time for you to address one of these other questions.
How did that happen?
I think it just mysteriously came up because of I think the importance of this, because this is something that happens, you know, a question in the world.
Okay, go ahead.
Have often.
Go ahead.
So this is Camg Ansley off of Facebook. As Africans, we came here even before Massa and brought our culture to these lands. Been here thousands of years. This is African West Wing.
The point is, and I've heard it many times, and it's correct, Africans explored the whole world. And we were the first people anywhere, if you want to tell the truth, you know. But the conditions that we are confronted with now is not through our loss of this land now that's called the United States. We are in the problem that we're in now because of the attack on Africa. And a whole new social system has come into existence as a consequence of that. If it's possible to free Africa, then it's going to come as a consequence of this process that created this social system that dispersed the African nation forcibly against our will to all these other places, and that it does not require the attack on other peoples who are also struggling against imperialism for its success. So to claim that since we were here a long time ago, and we were, I mean, that's no dispute, but I think that the real deal is that we and the most of us, the majority of us who are in this hemisphere, came here as a consequence of an attack on Africa, and not some trip that we decided that we were going to make a few thousand years ago to see what the hell was going on. And attack on Africa dragged us kicking and screaming against our will and kept us here, even if we wanted to go someplace else. And all of us here, against our will, created a social system, a whole social system that links the whole world up as host to a parasite, to a huge parasite. And the way out of this is through attacking that contradiction. And that means that we have to make a revolution that unites Africa and African people around the world. If we were here 1,000 years ago, the base that we came from was where? Africa. Africa produced us and et cetera. So that's the consequence, that's the issue that we're going to have to deal with. So I want to just express appreciation. I just want to quickly say that here's what I have. Please help me. Alienza, Maureen, Mother Africa in the Bronx, My Glove, Star,